Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to call to order this. It's the 9th or 10th hearing of the Board of Appeals on the H&W Apartments matter, not including a site visit, which took place on April 18th, 2015. At the last hearing, we asked if anyone wanted to submit materials relating to this application, and we received a ton of materials. Let me just cover a few formalities before we get involved in that. My name is John Leonard. I'm chairman of the Board of Appeals. With me this evening to my immediate right is board member Virginia Donahue King, and to my immediate left is board member Jeffrey Mullen. We're going to observe the same rules that we have for all of the other hearings. Namely, we'll certainly listen to the attorneys if they want to speak. We have a couple of special guests this evening that I understand want to speak. Just make sure that you tell us your name and address before you speak so that we'll have an accurate record of the hearing if we have to revert to the tape in order to decide this case. Let me just briefly outline some of the materials that we've received. I feel like an accountant on April 15th at about 11:30 at night. And I'm kind of sorry that we engage in this because this is a very technical hearing and there are technical issues involved. We'll hear from some of those specialists this evening. But it puts the public at a major league disadvantage, because unless you have time off from work or you're retired and you want to come up to the Board of Appeals and read 5 or 6 inches of technical materials, you're somewhat at a loss as to what's been filed. So I'm going to try to outline them very, very briefly, but they are public documents. Anyone can come and look at them at the Board of Appeals office. They're really too detailed and technical for me to try to summarize, because if I did that, I know I'd be unfair to the parties. So in a sense, we have to rely on counsel here to present their case in open session and to present these materials in a way that the public knows that they're being presented and what they contain. And they've done a wonderful job up to now, and I'm sure they're going to continue to do that. So the latest material we received was at 5:39 this evening, and it's from Attorney Diane Tillotson. Pardon me?
It was a little bit before that.
Oh.
That was just a confirmation that you.
Oh, okay. Well, what was it? At 5 o'clock?
3:30 or
3:30. Okay. And it's a letter from Diane Tillotson, who's a trial lawyer and a lawyer with land use and zoning specialty at the Boston law firm of Hemingway and Barnes, and they're located at 60 State Street in Boston. And they file a letter on behalf of Attorney Paul J. Kingston of 282 Highland Street, Milton, concerning the restriction of record that's been referred to by the applicant and some submittals. And Diane Tillotson requests that the board take certain action regarding the proposed parking on the site. We received a letter of June 17th, 2005 from Attorney Johanna Schneider on behalf of the Lombardi and Carlin families, which essentially contains her opinion as to the nature of this case and what is affecting the case. And she has a list of 30 conditions that she suggests if the board is going to allow this application, that they should consider imposing on this particular application. We received on June 16th, which is just a few days ago, a letter from Alan Caggiano at Mintz Levin representing the applicant, providing a lot of different materials. A memorandum by DeSell and Burke, the engineers for this project, a cover letter from Lynn Sweet, basically dealing with some revisions to the application and some investigation that she prepared and summarizes in the memorandum. And we also received a document entitled Fire Chief's Testimony. So that's all here. The only comment that I'd make on the materials that have been submitted here is that a lot of these documents contain multiple versions of hearsay testimony, opinions of witnesses who've never testified before the board, I presume are not going to testify before the board. And we're operating under the Administrative Procedure Act. We're not operating under the rules of evidence that you see in the Superior Court. But even under the Administrative Procedure Act, getting letters from experts who never appear to be questioned on their opinions, and having telephone conferences with certain town officials, and having that recited in a memorandum, and asking the board to accept that as evidence and credible evidence it's pushing the limit, to say the least, in my view. And to be frank about it, and I don't want to be overly picky, because we haven't been, and I don't intend to be, but generally speaking, if somebody's going to have a transcript prepared of a witness's testimony, you get the tape from Mrs. Fitzgerald, and you send it to a court reporter, an official court reporter, who does a transcript of what's on that tape and certifies it under oath. And this fire chief's testimony document, as I see it here, was prepared by a secretary from one of the lawyers. And I'm not saying it's not the chief's testimony, but it's not the technical way to do it. And whether the chief believes this is his testimony or not, we'll use our recollection and our notes and his letter to us, his letters to us. So I appreciate the applicant's diligence to try to get all the information that it thinks necessary to decide the application, but I'm concerned about the wide-ranging conclusions of experts who don't testify in court in this proceeding and are unavailable to be questioned. So we also received a letter from Kathleen O'Donnell, who's the attorney for the town here. It's dated June 15th, 2015, and Ms. O'Donnell expresses her opinions on certain relevant issues that she wants the board to consider, and sets forth certain conditions and positions that she suggests the town take based upon the evidence that the applicant has presented, and then her expertise in 40B matters. So I think that fairly...
That was part of what Alan had said.
Yes. Yeah. So I think that fairly summarizes what we've received. So I think the agenda this evening is to, first of all, hear from Mr. Glenn Pavlicek, who's the chairman of the school committee, who's requested, I'm sorry?
Not anymore.
Not anymore. Okay, well, whatever you are, Mr. Pavlicek, we'll certainly hear from you. Why don't you have a seat there, and let me just go over the rest of it. My children are too old to attend the school, so I don't keep... So Mr. Pavlicek has requested the opportunity of speaking to the board. Select person Katie Conlon wants to address the board I think on behalf of the selectmen, on behalf of the Board of Selectmen. And so we welcome her presence and her comments. Mr. Caggiano is here. He wanted to make a brief presentation on some of the materials that have been submitted. I don't see Dr. Dulaski here, but there he is, yes. There's been a revised gap study that's been filed with the board, and I think Mr. Caggiano may want Dr. Dulaski to address those issues. Mr. Holland is here. He's certainly entitled to speak if he wants. I don't know whether Ms. O'Donnell wants to be further heard. She indicates she doesn't, and I don't know whether...
We'll wait and see.
Ms. Schneider is here. I don't
No,
see her.
remember, this was the date, the one date she couldn't make it, so she
And
had a
that's,
conflict.
that's right. So I think that's the format of the meeting, and we'll see what time we achieve after hearing that type of material. If there's any member of the public present this evening who has not had an opportunity to be heard, if we have time, we certainly would like to hear them. I think it's our intent to try to close the evidence at this hearing, but let's see where that goes based upon how the evidence is presented. So without further ado, Mr. Pavlicek, welcome to the Board of Appeals. I think this is your first appearance before the board.
It is. My name is Glenn Pavlicek. I live at 115 Smith Road in Milton. I'm the Assistant Superintendent for Business Affairs for the Milton Public Schools. I used to be on the school committee. I'm no longer.
Good. Welcome to the Board of Appeals. We're delighted to hear from you.
I'm here tonight to speak about the issue of school buses at the proposed site, particularly the issue of school bus stops on Randolph Avenue. We currently, let me back up a little bit. Our school buses, we transport students by law who are in kindergarten through grade 6 who live more than 1.5 miles from their school. To the extent that we have empty seats on buses beyond that, we do sell bus passes for other students who might not be otherwise eligible to take buses to school, and they fill the empty seats in those buses. Our bus routes are set up to accommodate the people that we need to transport. They vary some from year to year, but they are relatively constant over time. Occasionally, every few years we have a more substantial revision to the routes, but they tend to be fairly static from year to year, as the population tends to be fairly static from year to year in its location. Every year around this time, we take the list of students who are eligible for buses. We then invite others, who wish to purchase a bus pass. We get the list of names, and at this time of the year, we have a little computer program that plots them all on the map of the town, and it attempts to create bus routes for the town. Then those of us who actually live here and are not computers look at them and say, oh God, you wouldn't want to do that, and amend the routes to make them a little more reasonable. So it's a combination of computer work and people who actually know the town and look at the routes and say, we'll adjust it this way. Just for reference, every bus runs 3 routes in the morning and 3 routes in the afternoon. It first picks up students for the middle school and high school who go to school earliest, then picks up students for the Cunningham and Collycott elementary schools, which start a little later, and then goes and does a 3rd route for the Glover and Tucker elementary schools, which have an even later start. So our buses run 3 routes in the morning around town. The question arose as to the issue of bus stops along Randolph Avenue. We, as a rule, do not send buses down private ways. We stick to major roadways.
Why do you not do that, sir?
A combination of liability, a combination of the fact that if a private way is maintained privately, you can, especially at wintertime, you never know what might be down there if you turn down it. A question of whether a bus could turn around in there. Also, I would say those are the principal issues. So the other issue is that with 3 routes, turning down private ways, turning around, coming back out takes time, and our routes are, when you're running 3 routes, you don't have time. I mean, basically, you're trying to make efficient stops and pickups. You're trying to pick up as many children as you can at easy locations to pick them up, so you can continue on your route and not back up later routes in the morning. So a variety of reasons. Just by the way, we don't own our buses. We contract with an outside provider for buses. We bid them on 3-year contracts through the standard 32B bid laws. So our current provider is First Student Transportation. With major roads, we try to stop at safe intersections for children to be picked up, but on some of the major roads in town, Randolph Ave being one of them, Upper Canton Ave, we're very leery of having children walk at all along those roads. So even though we would prefer to stop, say, on a side street at a corner abutting that road, if a child, for instance, lives on a road like Randolph Avenue, we actually put the stop at the end of their driveway and pick that one child up. Because we just, for safety reasons, don't want children walking there or along streets, for instance, the southern end of Canton Avenue where there are no sidewalks. We just don't want, for safety reasons, children walking along there. So you'll find that, in fact, on some of those streets, if there are two consecutive houses with driveways 50 feet apart, we will actually stop at the end of both driveways to pick up children. So while it's not our preference to stop on those roads, for safety reasons, we do. But generally, those stops are to pick up and discharge the children from one household. So it's one or two children who are waiting at the end of the driveway. We stop, we pick them up, and we move on. And those stops are ones that we assign them basically on an annual basis. If there are children at those houses, we pick them up. But they're not part of sort of our regular collection of stops. They're stops that we add to the route for reasons of safety of the children. So with respect to Randolph Avenue, we do have several stops along the State Highway section of Randolph Avenue between the DPW yard, say, and Chickatawbut Road. But those stops, and there are probably 4 or 5 of them, I don't have the list in front of me, are at individual houses based on the fact that there are children there. As I say, we would prefer to have stops, for instance, say, at the end of Reed Street, actually have the bus stop on Reed Street. If we had a stop at the Reed Street in Randolph and stop there, pick up and discharge, rather than on the Randolph side of the street. But for reasons of safety, we will stop on major streets. The concern was raised about would this be different for Meg Lane? The major issue from our perspective is that if there are more children there and at a stop that would be for, say, a development, the time that the bus is actually standing there picking up or discharging students is longer, especially in the morning. Kids get off the bus faster than they get on the bus. So you're stopping potentially on Randolph Avenue and holding traffic up and picking up children for a longer period of time than you would if there were just one student or a pair of siblings at a driveway. That's the principal difference we see in a stop like a Meg Lane stop versus the existing stops on Randolph Avenue. Just for purposes of information, when both stops, both morning and afternoon, would be at the same location, we would not, say, for instance, stop on the east side of Randolph Avenue in the morning and the west side in the afternoon. We wouldn't do that. I mean, if there are, again, children on both sides of the street, we will actually turn the bus around and stop on both sides of the street. We will never have a child cross Randolph Avenue to pick up, to get the bus. We don't consider that to be safe. And we do the same on, Upper Canton Avenue and places like that. We work the routes, or Reedsdale Street or any of those. We work the routes so that children are picked up on a side of the street that doesn't involve them having to cross it, because we don't think that's a safe issue. So there were some questions asked. I was referred to in one of the correspondences you received. So I offered to come and answer any questions you might have concerning bus routes or bus stops with respect to Randolph Avenue.
Well, good. Thank you for doing that. We appreciate it. Mr. Jeffrey Mullen, do you have any questions of Mr. Pavlicek?
Thank you for that. And Alan, this might require your assistance in this answer. So you sent, Alan, you sent, I don't know if you've seen this, Glenn,
Here it is.
with your, actually, it came to us twice. On June 16, you sent a letter, and then earlier, as I read it over the weekend, you sent it with your, it's the bus route, it's the bus route schedule. It's schedule Route 4C, Route 7B, Collycott. Yeah, Collycott and Cunningham, Route 1B. In any event, I want to talk to you about this crossing Randolph Avenue. On Route 4C, according to the, no, I'm sorry, the Pierce Middle Milton High route, according to this piece, has got stops at 1278, 712, and 624 Randolph in the AM and PM. And the numbers run north to south, so 1278 is the furthest south, and 624 is the furthest north. This route indicates that the bus in the morning is traveling in a northbound direction.
Correct.
So are we to understand from your testimony that you would be adding an additional route to run in the southbound direction to pick up the children on the west side of Randolph Avenue?
We would put a stop on the southbound side. Would it be this bus? I'm not sure. Maybe, it probably would be. Somehow we would have to turn the bus around, but we would put a stop on the other side of the road. We would not have the children cross the road.
Is in the morning, is there any bus that stops southbound on Randolph Avenue, to your knowledge?
I think 693 does.
693?
The one that's listed here is Route 7B. That's an afternoon run.
Yeah, you can't tell because you don't have an AM. There's no AM.
Yeah, I would have to look at the, yeah, this is an amalgamation of.
Yeah, this is probably the most confusing chart I've ever read, but I think I understand it, and I think there may be some missing data.
You know, the routes are considerably longer than this.
Oh, I understand.
Yeah,
But
so
this
these
is a
are.
sampling, but what it does reveal is that if you look at it, it gives you the most important fact, which is the direction the bus is moving.
Right.
Because your testimony was, and in fact, the applicant told us that her conversation with the people from First Transit, right?
First student.
First student, I'm sorry, Cincinnati.
Well, Abington, but Cincinnati's the
Yeah.
home office. Be a long ride in
That
the
they
morning from
didn't
Abington.
cross the street.
Yeah.
Never crossed the street. So my point is that this is a lot more complicated than what we've got in front of us, and it's way more complicated by what you've said. And it's not clear to me how it currently works, and it's less clear how it will be made to work to pick up the children in the morning who want to go north, but the bus needs to be going south, because all of the schools are north of the site.
Correct.
And the reverse is true in the PM. All of the schools are coming from the north, but I don't know that any of the, well, actually, I know that the 7B travels in the southbound direction in the PM because of the data. But some of this data is inconsistent, so, I think one of these PMs should be an AM time. 554, for example, shows 3:05 PM, but I think that first entry should be an AM time, indicating that in the morning, the 7B route heads north, and in the afternoon, the 7B route heads south. So it seems to me it would work in the afternoon, but it wouldn't work in the morning. And if I understand this chart correctly, the 7B route is serving Collycott and Cunningham. So the question is, I'm assuming there are some children who are going to be going to Glover and Tucker here? Is that how it works now?
It could. This particular area would normally be served by the Cunningham School, or Cunningham and Collycott schools. But for instance, we have choice programs in the school, the French immersion, for instance. So it is possible that someone here might be going to might have chosen to go to the Glover or Tucker school based on availability of a program that they were looking for there. Or we have some specialized programs for some special needs children that are at the Glover or Tucker, so they might go there. So the the C route, which is the third bus route of the day. For instance, a bus in the morning would do 7A to high school, 7B to Cunningham Collicott, and 7C to Glover Tucker.
It's very clear.
So
Completely understand that.
the C route might be making another stop at the same spot half an hour later to pick up children to go to a different school.
All right. So I don't know how many children are going to be living here. There's 90 units. We've asked, and I think it's hard to estimate that, and I think the applicant said it was hard to estimate that. But there'll be a few. If there's a child who goes to Tucker, and a child who goes to Glover, and a child who goes to Cunningham, and a child who goes to Pierce, and then one at the high school, are they all entitled to transportation?
If they're more than 1.5 miles from their school and they're in grades K through 6, they're legally entitled to transportation.
Just K through 6. So
K
take
through 6.
the Pierce and the high school away.
Pearson High School can buy seats because
buy seats, okay.
we own the buses for the morning, so we'll run the routes, and if people want to have a bus pass and take those routes, they can. We do have a large number of students from the middle and high school who do ride the buses, even though they're not legally entitled to ride them for free.
So with respect to Cunningham, Glover, Tucker, it's conceivable that, and the start times are the same?
Cunningham and Collicott are the same. Glover and Tucker are later. The high school and middle school are
Are
early.
Glover and Tucker the same?
Yes,
And Glover, Tucker, same bus?
same bus. It's
So it
close
could be-
enough that we can drop off at Glover and then drop at Tucker.
So it's possible, perhaps probable, that in the morning, you would arrange a system where the children would walk down the hill and it would stop at the bottom of the driveway,
Yes,
traveling south. That bus would then turn around and head back to Tucker, Glover, and another bus would head back to Collicott.
yes.
Two of them, two different buses, right? And then
Conceivably 3 if they were high school, middle school
high
students.
school, middle school. And is there any way to verify whether that, whether there's, and what the frequency of the current busing is in the southbound direction on Randolph Avenue now, in the morning? I don't think you can tell from the data necessarily, but so, in some ways, I may be asking the applicant.
If these are the only, I believe these are the only Randolph Avenue stops on any of our routes. So it looks like we have the three traverses of Randolph Avenue. The Pierce High School one is heading northbound in the morning,
It's headed north in the afternoon, too, according
and
to the chart.
chart in the afternoon too. So I believe that one comes around Hillside Street and up Randolph Ave that way. So I believe it's picking up Hillside, Mark Lane, up that area, and then comes up Randolph Ave is my recollection. Well, it may pick up also the, by Nahanton and Ridgewood and so forth.
But that wouldn't work for the development. You'd have to have a different bus.
We would have a different bus going south for the development. We would, I'd have to look at the routes, but it might even go south first, go pick up Hillside, and then come back north. It would depend on the timing. We'd have to look at that.
I think your consultant had a question. I don't want to recognize him.
Hi, I'm Lynn Sleet. I did write the memo.
You gotta come up.
And I just wanted to
Lynn,
say that
you
the
gotta-
bus route is on the town's website. That's where that information came from. Unfortunately, I'm not able to get into it because we're in the basement.
And just to add, 693 Randolph Avenue is the site that's immediately adjacent to the project site. In fact, it's owned by the applicant.
Yeah, well, it only says it stops at 3:13 in the afternoon once. It doesn't say it stops in the morning.
I'll just clarify.
The only reason we would have, again, I don't have the full list of all the stops in the website in front of me. The only reason we would have a stop in the afternoon at a place and not in the morning is, for instance, if a child was being dropped off at daycare providers or something like that. Generally speaking, you would see a stop in the morning that matches the stop in the afternoon. But again, I don't have the full list in front of me, so I'm not sure.
I guess overall, it's not clear to me that what we've, if the intention of this was to show that we've got a busing system that would accommodate the development, I don't think that's the case. I think it needs to be supplemented, which is fine, but I just think, this is, I think the key factor that both the applicant said and what you, Glenn, indicated, the notion that you wouldn't let a child cross the street, I think adds additional complexity, and I think these would have to be presented in a different way to get a full understanding of how the busing system is really gonna work for I guess it would be for the 3 locations, Pierce High School, Glover Tucker, Cunningham Common. I have no more questions.
Mrs. King?
No.
So I may just add to that. The point of submitting the busing information is just to demonstrate to the town that there is a elaborate and apparently complex process for the town to assess and determine the best bus routes on an annual basis. And this project would be folded into that analysis as well, and, proper busing would be provided as a result. Because as the superintendent indicated, it's required by law.
Mr. Miller?
Yes, let me just ask a couple
no,
of
no.
That's the
questions.
purpose, thank you. That's what it does.
It's Dr. Pavlicek, is it not?
It is.
It is.
You don't have to be that.
Okay. Since you're not getting paid, we'll call you Glenn. How's that? Let me ask you this. Isn't, from a planning perspective, if you've got a mix you've got a 90-unit apartment complex, and we tell you what the mix is of 1 bedroom, 2 bedrooms, and 3 bedrooms, isn't it possible to reasonably estimate the amount of school children that you're liable to encounter living on that particular project?
There are charts and estimates. I served on the master planning committee for the town for a while, and we were presented by one of our consultants with, some charts that you could use for estimates, let's say for a 3-bedroom house in this community and in this location, you should use a number of this. I've seen them. I don't testify that that I can say anything about their veracity, but I know that there are numbers that are used.
Okay, and you haven't performed any estimate as to the
Oh, no.
number of children that are liable to be encountered at this location?
No.
Okay. You don't want children crossing Randolph Avenue, but the buildings here are a significant distance from the pickup spot.
Mm-hmm.
And when the pickup spots around my neighborhood, which are not on a major road like Randolph Avenue, you usually find 5, 6, 8 cars with parents, particularly in the wintertime, but also in the summertime as well, with the children. And once the bus comes, they all jump on the bus and the cars scatter. Here, presumably, the parents and the children are going to walk from the project down the hill to the pickup spot. I guess my question is, noting that this road is perhaps significantly different from some of the side streets where pickups usually occur, is there any type of safety procedures or precautions that should be in effect so that the children are within a specific area, or they're cordoned off, or they're not allowed to go wandering? If one kid comes down, he happens to be 12 years old, and his parent is ill and he can't come down to the pickup spot, from a safety perspective, should there be some type of measures in effect that keep the children in place? And if so, what would you recommend?
We don't specify any because it varies greatly from location to location. I mean, we don't require bus enclosures or sidewalks of a specific size, or even sidewalks, because in many places in town we don't have them. If the best I can say is if it's at a particular intersection and we, in conversation with parents, deem the intersection to be a little too busy, we might try to move it up the street, 50 feet or 100 feet around a turn to try to keep it away from a corner. I don't think that's really an option here since we wouldn't be turning the corner. Just from observation, my observation is the same as yours. I would expect to see some cars, especially on rainy days or in the winter, with parked by the stop, keeping their children warm in the car or dry in the car, waiting for the bus.
They'd be in the private driveway?
In the private driveway, I assume.
I assume so.
But I would expect, especially if there's any distance involved coming down the hill, that you're likely to see some parents doing that. That's just an observation from what I see around town. Because when you drive around with the bus in the morning, I'd say at many stops, you'll find cars with parents waiting there to pick up their children. I think it's fairly common.
Do you agree with me that it's not the function of the trained school bus driver to, when he makes a stop, perhaps this particular stop, to get off the bus and make sure all the children are together and in uniform and get them on the bus?
Oh, the bus driver would not get off the bus. I mean,
Under any
no,
circumstances?
the bus company wouldn't want that. They want the driver in the seat in the bus. They're not a bus monitor, and we don't have bus monitors on our bus.
When the children go onto the bus, they pick their own seats. Is
Yes.
that true? And do they have seat belt mechanisms to put on or
No.
anything?
No, the buses for student users do not have seat belts. That's a nationwide debate that we can get into, whether students are safer with seat belts or safer without them, and there's data both ways. But at the moment,
What do you think?
I'd like to see students sitting in their seats. Whether the problem with in an accident, sometimes getting them out of buckling is an issue, and so I don't profess to be an expert enough to try to decide which way we should do it. I know it is unusual in this area to see school buses with seat belts. Not special education, smaller buses always have them, but the large yellow school buses, you don't see the seat belts on them so much. But students get onto the bus themselves, take their seat. The bus driver does not move the bus until everyone is seated. So the time at the stop is the time it takes for the students to get on the bus, get to their seats, sit down, and then the bus driver closes the doors and takes off.
Okay, do you know, I know you're not a traffic engineer, you're not purporting to be. We do have several that are involved in this case. But are there any statistics that you're aware of that deals with stopping on major thoroughfares like Randolph Avenue for significant periods of time, let's say 30 seconds, a minute and a half, and the likelihood of those school buses being rear-ended by vehicles that are texting, talking on the phone, or anything?
I have no data on that at all. I really don't know much about that other than, anecdotally what anyone else would have, but I have no particular knowledge of that. I will tell you that I was at the scene of one bus accident on Reedsdale Road where a bus took a right turn at St. Elizabeth's from Reedsdale onto Randolph Ave and made a stop, and a driver made the turn behind them and hit them from behind. Luckily, there were only 3 students on the bus and no one was hurt, but I got that call actually myself and went to the scene. So I know at least once in the last 6 months that has happened.
Based upon your present experience, is there any way you can reasonably estimate the number of students that would be on the school bus as it approaches and stops at Meg Lane? Whether the school bus would be half full, or 90% full, or 10% full?
It would really depend on the route. I mean, when you have a stop like this that's sort of isolated from other stops, it could just as easily be the first stop on the route as the last stop on the route because you're generally working the routes to fit it in. So it's really not, it would be very hard to say. Our buses, for the most part, have enough riders that they are usually filled reasonably to capacity, depending on, so the mathematician in me says you would guess that it would be about half full because you don't know at what point of the route this particular stop is, whether the beginning or the end. But a full elementary bus is 68 students. A full high school, middle school bus is 44 or thereabouts. They could, but you could have anything from very few to a full bus.
Depending on the specific circumstances, which we're not able to presently estimate, but if you found that there were 15, 20, or 30 kids that were being assembled for the purposes of getting on one or more of the school buses, you don't have any estimate as to the reasonable amount of time it takes a child to go from the sidewalk onto the school bus and to become seated, do you?
It's been a while since my children 24 and 26, it's been a while since they've gotten on school buses, but I would say that, you know, for 10 children, say, to get up on a bus, get to their seats and sit down, if you could do it in a minute, you'd be lucky, I think.
Yeah, because they're interacting with the students
You know,
on.
they're getting up,
Yeah.
it's not necessarily, especially younger children, it's not necessarily efficient process. Younger children tend to weave around a little bit.
Squirmy.
Yeah.
So if,
As I say, in the afternoon, it's much faster. They're
Bas-
quick
bas-
at getting off the bus.
I'm with you. Based on the real world, what happens here, if you did find that there were 10 or 15 or 20 students that were getting on these buses, would you consult with the police department, for example, with Chief Wells, and make a determination as to whether the bus being stopped there for more than a half a minute or something is liable to cause a risk, and require a cruiser or a police cruiser to be there behind that bus in order to protect the
We
students?
do consult with the chief on matters where we think there are safety issues. The school committee currently has a transportation and safety subcommittee that's investigating, for instance, safe walking routes to schools for walkers and bike routes and so forth, and they meet with the police chief and his representatives. The issue of, for instance, crossing guards in East Milton Square is a current topic of concern. So we do talk to the chief, and we do talk to members of his staff about placement. We've, to my knowledge, never encountered a situation where we needed to have a cruiser at a stop. But it's not to say it couldn't happen, but to my knowledge, we've never done that.
Well, if the chief thought it was appropriate from a child's safety perspective, would the cost of that cruiser be imposed on the project, or is that a cost that the town would have to absorb or undertake?
I think that's a question for the chief. I'm not sure. If it was a standard patrol car that he would just have stop by at the particular time, it may not be an issue. If it had to be something longer and a small detail or something like that, that would be different. I'm not sure how the chief assigns his cruisers in the morning or the afternoon to deal with that. That really would be a question for him as to whether there would be a cost involved, and if so, to whom. My worry is it would be to me for the school department, but I don't know that. So I would have to, as I say, it's not something that, to my knowledge, we've ever done, so it's not a question I've ever really had to think about.
From your knowledge generally of the school routes in Milton, Massachusetts, do you know of any other similar highways or major thoroughfares where a significant student bus stop exists, and whether there've been any issues that have been caused by that? In other words, are there any comparable circumstances of which you're aware that we should be aware of as well? Or is this sufficiently unique that you'd have to look at it as a special case?
Randolph Ave, and that section of Randolph Ave is probably a higher traffic area than most streets I can think of in town. Maybe Granite Avenue in East Milton towards the Dorchester line, and there might be other comparables. Even Canton Avenue coming in from Canton, where there's a fair amount of traffic in the morning coming through, We don't have stops there that have large numbers of students. On Granite Avenue in East Milton, the stops tend to be off Granite Avenue, for instance, down Thistle in that area, by the expressway, by the entrance ramp. I think we tend to pull off there to pick up students rather than stop on the street. I'm hard-pressed to think of major stops on similarly busy streets to that section of Randolph Ave.
And from your general knowledge, I know we're not putting you to the test here, Dr. Glenn, but are there any off Randolph Avenue locations that would be safer and more suitable for having a stop rather than the stop right at the end of the driveway? Or are they sufficiently far removed that you'd have to have traffic going off the site and going into the side streets?
Well, I mean, if as we prefer, we would stop on a side street, then you would either have to stop at, say, the corner of Reedsdale and Randolph, which is a busy intersection, and with a right turn lane probably wouldn't be a great place for a school bus stop. Or if the bus were to come down Reed Street and stop there, but that would require the students to walk along Randolph Ave to Reed Street.
Which you would not want to have happen.
We would prefer not to. I mean, if we were told that it was a safety issue, for instance, if in consultation with the police chief, he said there's no way you should be stopping at the end of Meg Lane, you should stop the bus at the end of Reed Street, and we believe that it's safe enough for the students to walk down to there, we would do it. But it wouldn't be a preference, I don't think. We try not to have children walking for any distance at all on these kinds of streets.
Do you know whether on any occasion where you have a stop that may be particularly troublesome, where the town or the state has required signage to be placed 50 yards or 75 yards before the bus stop, that could be light activated if other than the flashing lights on the bus, that would say school bus stop ahead. Is that?
I've seen them in communities, but I haven't really discussed them with anyone as possibilities in Milton.
Okay, is that something?
No one has suggested, well, no one has suggested would probably be the police chief, but it hasn't come up in conversation with the police department about doing that. Yeah, I'm not aware of any in town, certainly.
Well, maybe that's because this is a unique location.
Maybe it's because lighted signs are an issue in Milton in general.
I think that's certainly true. Thank you. I have no further questions. Ms. O'Donnell, did you have something?
I just had a comment in that we had very nicely asked, it's very nice of you to come along, but we really had two issues. Not just the bus service for the project, but also the fact, as I can speak to personal experience, and as you mentioned, Mr. Leonard, that there's queuing of cars waiting with the kids in the morning, in the winter, in the rain, picking up the kids in the afternoon. In my neighborhood on Belcher Circle, there's a pile of 6 or 7 cars every morning. So that addresses a problem that we have all along with the access in and out of this project. In that you are going to have not only the school bus stopping by 3 times in the morning and 3 times in the afternoon, blocking the entrance and egress from the project, and all the traffic on Randolph Avenue supposedly stopping. Of course, that's got to be a wishful thought. And also, but also the fact that the choke point of the roadway would be affected by the queuing of the parents. Because it's about 400 feet walk and a pretty steep slope
From the
of
buildings.
this project, from the building down there. So I would certainly expect to have parents waiting in cars. And that affects both the entrance and the egress out of the project pretty significantly, I believe.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Caggiano, do you have any either questions of Mr. Pavlicek?
I do not know.
Okay, great. Mr. Pavlicek, thank you for coming.
Thank you.
tonight.
Thank you.
This is yours.
Yeah, thanks.
Ms. Conlon, do you want to speak at the present time? We're delighted to have you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and members of the Board of Appeals. My name is Katie Conlon. I live at 42 Reedsdale Road, and I'm a member of the Board of Selectmen, and I'm speaking here tonight on behalf of the full Board of Selectmen. And I will be as brief as possible. Just wanted to bring out a few points. The first one is that increasing affordable housing in Milton is a priority for the Board of Selectmen. Last fall, together with the Planning Board, we adopted a housing production plan, which has been approved by the Department of Housing and Community Development. We've approved 5 trustees, some of whom have very extensive experience in affordable housing, to a new affordable housing trust. And just last month, town meeting saw fit to appropriate seed money for the trust. We do want to add more units of affordable housing to Milton's subsidized housing inventory in order to move the town closer to the goal of having 10% of our housing stock be affordable. So we are not opposed to affordable housing at this location. However, the Board of Selectmen does have very serious concerns about the massive size and scope and the design of the project that's before you. We urge the Board of Appeals to not issue a comprehensive permit for this site without substantially reducing the size and density of the project because of the public safety risks that have been brought to light during these proceedings by Attorney Kathleen O'Donnell and several of the town's department heads, as well as by some of the abutters. As the public hearing process draws to a close, the Board of Selectmen would like to highlight a few of the key public safety risks that are inherent in the applicant's current proposal. The first one is density, and we really cannot emphasize enough what Attorney O'Donnell stated at a recent hearing. Wetlands occupy much of this site. The total size of the applicant's property may be 6 to 7 acres, but we understand that only about 3.3 acres are buildable. And building 90 units on 3.3 acres means a density of approximately 27 units per acre. We believe that is simply too much. The developer is proposing to build a fortress in the middle of a swamp, to quote Attorney O'Donnell. And the small amount of buildable space is the reason that parking lots and buildings would be pushed up against abutters' properties, and a play area for children would be reached only by a path that snakes through wetlands. The sole access road is too narrow. The proposed width of the road enables the applicant to avoid obtaining a MEPA permit, but for public safety reasons, the town believes that the access road should be wider. And Attorney O'Donnell has set forth some conditions in her recent filing that she suggests that you consider for any permit. One is that a left turning lane be added to ameliorate the backup of cars queuing up at the exit during the morning rush hour in particular. We'd like to see the drive have a boulevard design with 2 16-foot wide travel lanes separated by an 8-foot wide median strip that the fire trucks can traverse. And we believe that 2 sidewalks, not 1, should be required, and each should be 5 feet wide. This is needed for better pedestrian access, snow clearing, and to accommodate students waiting on Route 28 for a school bus, as we've just heard. We think it would be unconscionable to expose residents of the apartments to safety risks just so that the developer can avoid obtaining a MEPA permit. The police chief and many residents have spoken about very serious traffic and public safety concerns that Route 28 presents, and we echo those concerns. I'm not going to repeat them all tonight. I know that you've heard a lot of testimony and they're all on the record. I do want to reiterate a couple of points that Dr. Pavlicek stated tonight regarding the school buses. This is a serious public safety concern for the Board of Selectmen, and we imagine it would be also for the school committee and for parents who are living in the H&W apartments. Because with a 90-unit development, we can expect probably dozens of children to be picked up and dropped off on this dangerous road at different times during the morning and the afternoon. And we all know that when a school bus stops to pick up or discharge students, flashing red lights and a stop sign on the bus require drivers traveling in both directions to stop. The bus, we believe, would be facing southbound, so 2 southbound lanes will have to stop. And because Route 28 is not a divided highway, the 2 lanes of northbound rush hour traffic will also have to stop. If a dozen or so children board the school bus at any one time, traffic will be delayed for a few minutes. And this will happen multiple times a day because there are 3 routes in the morning and 3 in the afternoon. I think you need to query what impact will these delays have on the applicant's traffic analysis, the gap analysis, and how many accidents could be caused by drivers stopping suddenly in the northbound lanes. And what about the parents who drive their children down the hill to the bus stop? They can't wait on Route 28 for the bus. To do so would really be to take their life in their hands and to interrupt the traffic flow. So cars and SUVs can be expected to queue up in the driveway, where there's no space to turn around and go back up the hill. So if a parent drops off a child at the foot of the hill at the bus stop, in order to get back to the apartment, the driver has to turn onto Route 28 to the right and make the long loop back to Route 28 by using numerous side streets. For parents who choose to walk young children to the bus stop, the applicant has proposed only a narrow sidewalk, 4 feet, on one side of the driveway, not 2 sides. If I'm remembering correctly back to the first hearing in December, the testimony was that the larger building would have hallways the length of a football field and only 1 elevator. It's not unimaginable that families living at the far end of the building might some days find themselves scrambling down the hill a bit late for the school bus, and the bus waiting a little bit longer and delaying traffic longer for them to arrive. I think we just have to hope that with parents standing with young children on the sidewalk, other parents and children in cars in the queue along the driveway, and the school bus at the entrance, hopefully no one in the apartment building has a medical emergency and calls 911 for the fire department. We might chuckle at that, but the reality is that there would be a lot of rush hour activity in this very large development on a small site on a heavily trafficked state highway. A school bus picking up 1 or 2 children from the driveway of a private home on Route 28 is bad enough. But a school bus picking up a dozen students from a 90-unit apartment building with no space for a parking queue other than the roadway poses greater safety concerns in our view. There's no comparison between the 2 scenarios. The applicant's memo suggesting that the school bus stop at the property presents no real concerns here is really without merit. We're also concerned about wetlands. Wetlands make up a significant portion of this property, and the enormous size of the proposed development creates a serious risk of downstream flooding. We are concerned about the impact to homeowners on Randolph Ave, and therefore we urge you to deny the requested waiver of Milton's conservation bylaws, to not permit the disturbance, with any disturbance, within the 25-foot wetlands buffer zone, and to require a hydrological study with respect to the adequacy of the culvert and the potential for flooding. Stormwater is another issue. It's only because the buildable area here is so small that the applicant proposes to construct the stormwater infiltration system under the 2 buildings and the parking lot. I believe the testimony indicated that such a design is not common. It's also costly, in our view, which would presumably add to the applicant's need for greater density to make the project financially feasible. Maintenance and repair of a stormwater system under a building may be very difficult or even impossible to perform. We ask that any permit that may be issued require that the stormwater infiltration system be located at least 20 feet from any building foundation. The proposed development is not consistent with design guidelines for affordable housing. And Mr. Chairman, with your permission, I'd like to quote from a note I received from Alex Whiteside, a member and a former longtime chairman of the Milton Planning Board, about the architectural design of the buildings. And I'd be happy to forward the email so you have it for your records.
Thank you.
Alex is a former general counsel of DHCD, so he is very familiar with 40B issues. And he wrote the following: "It seems to me that the architecture of the proposed Randolph Avenue project is unnecessarily bad. Even if one were to assume that the requested number of units were necessary, there is no reason why such a pedestrian, unattractive, insensitive design is financially necessary for the project. The Board of Appeals can attach conditions to a project so long as they don't make the project financially impractical. With a suggestion of a better architectural layout, the Board of Appeals could require its implementation. 40B does not require bad architecture. Good architecture is part of the 40B program, so long as it does not render a development financially impossible. A high-quality architectural layout for a significantly lower number of units has been proposed by some residents and is said to be a financially viable alternative. If that proposal is not currently financially viable and a number of additional units is deemed necessary for a financially successful project, the residents' proposal for a series of smaller buildings seems capable of expansion with the result of a far better development containing the requisite number of units for financial practicality. A 40B development does not have to be ugly. Ugly buildings are less desirable to renters than attractive ones. Ugly buildings are less valuable. The proposed development is very ugly. Attractive buildings would benefit the developers, the residents, and outside observers. The Board of Appeals should require a better, financially feasible development plan. That's the end of the note.
Great, thank you.
I believe Mr. Whiteside is right, that there are better designs for housing at this site that the developer could and should propose. A design that fits in with the neighborhood, such as garden-style or townhouse apartments. That's also what Mass Housing's handbook suggests for integrating large 40B projects into residential neighborhoods such as this one. Milton deserves better, the abutters deserve better, and future residents of this property deserve better than what has been proposed. Initially, the developer proposed 3 smaller buildings with 72 units. Now it proposes 2 big box buildings. Some abutters have suggested a different design style for housing at this site. And there are many options that would make for a financially feasible project. We encourage the Board of Appeals not to acquiesce to a plan that would shoehorn a fortress the size of a football field into a tight, swampy site. There can and should be a better compromise project that works for the developer, the abutters, the town, and the future residents of this site, and minimizes public safety risks. In closing, the Board of Selectmen urges the Board of Appeals to reduce the size and density of the applicant's project. We ask you to seriously consider the elimination of the smaller building and the reduction of the size of the larger building, preferably by breaking it up into smaller buildings. This would allow the stormwater system to be constructed in a conventional manner and avoid the need for retaining walls, which we believe would save the applicant a considerable expense. It would also resolve the parking and snow storage problems, reduce safety risks and the traffic burden, and lessen the impact on abutters and wetlands, while still providing much-needed affordable housing for Milton. Thank you very much for your consideration of our concerns and those raised by Attorney O'Donnell and our department heads during this process.
Great, thank you very much for coming this evening. We appreciate your comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Caggiano, I think you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'd like to begin just by saying that the applicant has been working on this project and refining this project for over 2 years at this point, most publicly during the last 6.5 months during this public hearing process. We have heard countless suggestions and comments from the board, abutters, public officials, et cetera, with respect to the project. And we're appreciative of those comments. In fact, we've revised the project design in a number of ways to accommodate those comments, and we truly believe the project is a better project now as a result of this process. The applicant has responded to each and every suggestion and comment that's been raised throughout this public hearing process. And although some abutters and others who are opposed to the project would apparently disagree, the project, as revised through this process, is based on and is consistent with applicable legal and engineering principles and standards. Throughout the course of the last 6.5 months, especially recently, there have been a handful of issues that have been repeatedly raised and addressed and studied in materials submitted to the board. I just wanted to take a moment to discuss some of those particular concerns. And for the record, since some of the submissions were made recently, I thought I'd go through a couple of those. The first is with respect to the access drive and secondary access and the width of the access drive and its design. We submitted a memo on this recently, and I'd like to just point out a few facts with respect to the access drive. The first is that it meets all town and industry standards and will be able to properly serve the project. The town's very own peer reviewers, Niche Engineering and Vanas, did not disagree with that assessment. They've made some comments which were addressed, and ultimately, at the end of the day, the town's peer reviewers were comfortable with the project as designed, the access drive as designed. The town's subdivision rules allow for dead-end drives not to exceed 500 or 650 feet. This access drive is 350 feet, well below those thresholds. The town's bylaws expressly prohibit access drives from exceeding 24 feet. So by the town's very own bylaws, we would be prohibited from expanding this drive beyond 24 feet. Larger projects in Milton that have more units also have longer access drives and narrower drives than this project. The Milton Fire Chief also testified that the proposed project does not pose concern with the fire department's ability to operate on the site. We have provided a transcript of that testimony, and it was not certified as Mr. Leonard had indicated. However, the testimony was made on the record and is available via audio and video if you wanted to compare the two.